Good afternoon, and thank you so much for spending your time with us. In the year 1909, a young Indian lawyer from Johannesburg arrives in London and chances upon a revolutionary manifesto written by a Russian count in a Canadian newspaper. Titled A Letter to a Hindu, it declares that love is the only force that might be able to liberate 300 million Indians from a few thousand British officers. Having read this, the young Indian lawyer and the Russian count embark upon an intellectual partnership that, that in many, many ways helps to dismantle an empire. They correspond until the Russian count passes away 2 years later. The two will never meet in their lifetime, but their descendants are with us today and have met for the first time this very afternoon. The two individuals I am talking about are, of course, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi and Leo Tolstoy. In order to set the stage and tell you a little bit more about how exactly this relationship begins, I'm going to ask Gopal, would you like to tell us a little bit about how exactly Gandhi chances upon this letter to a Hindu and what happens on the day he reads it?
Well, in 1909, Gandhi was already an established barrister in South Africa. But more than that, he was a highly trusted and highly activated leader of the Indian South African community. And in that year, 1909, he went on a deputation to London to speak about the travails of the Indian South Africans and to seek redress from His Majesty's government. And it so happened that this person who passionately believed in non-violent resistance, the day he landed in London occurred an extraordinary and almost unprecedented act of violence, which was also an act of bravery and an act of nationalism. An Indian youth called Madan Lal Dhingra, on that very day that Gandhi landed in London, assassinated a British official called Sir Curzon Willie at a gathering of Indian students in London. And so there was high drama on the day he landed in London. Here is a man who comes with a deputation saying, Indian South Africans want justice, but they want it without violence. They want equality, but they don't want hatred. And on the same day, this passionate nationalist has assassinated a British official in the same city of London. And so it was with great pressure, political and moral, that he went forward and gave his deputation, his memoranda. But it so happened that at that time in circulation in London was this extraordinary letter written by Leo Tolstoy in the shape of a public manifesto called A Letter to a Hindu. It had been written at the instance of Taraknath Das, an Indian revolutionary based in North America, for the journal called Indian Reformer. In that letter, Tolstoy quotes great texts from the Hindu faith, Krishna and the Gita, and also from the extraordinary work, the Tirukkural, the great Tamil classic, which is essentially a book of ethics, ethical principles. And he says in that, Tolstoy says in that love, not hate, is the only way in which the Hindu, by which he really meant the people of India, can overcome the British, not by violence, but by love. So this is something which chimed immediately with Gandhi. And then began a correspondence between the two. Manasi, I think I should stop here and continue later.
So you have just heard from Gopalkrishna Gandhi, who is a descendant of Mahatma Gandhi. it is interesting to me that for the first time, Gopal, you have met Daniil Tolstoy, who is the great grandson of Leo Tolstoy. So, Daniil, can I ask you to set the stage for us a little bit? Who is Leo Tolstoy at the time at which he writes this letter, and why is he writing this letter?
Well, first of all, he just encountered all the violences of the revolution in 1905, which was an effect of the Russian-Japanese War. And he came to see that, or believed that there was no solution to violence or injustices in the system if you follow the same methods as your oppressor. And so he starts by deciding to find a core in all religions, some ethical, moral code that would exist. And at the age of 45, learns ancient Greek to be able to translate the Gospels. And after a year, it said that he learned Greek so well that he could read Homer. And after 6 years of work, he translated and synthesized the Gospel into something that he would call the Gospel in brief. And also, this was the basis of his book, The Kingdom of God is Within You. I think it's and that vein, and also I think he was proven right in his idea that violence begets violence, because if you look at the Russian Revolution that later happened in 17, which he fortunately missed, society was, I mean, of course, the idea was to create equality, but the society that was created through violence was in fact much worse than the society that had existed before, and 20 million people died. And one could say that, I mean, it was exactly the same thing, slightly worse, but with different labels. And so I think that's when he heard about the struggle in India, it was very important for him that it would be done by non-violent, active but non-violent means, and through agape, the unconditional love that he found was the true meaning of life.
And can you also tell us a little bit about the contents of this letter, this extraordinary 6,000-word letter that he writes?
Yes, I mean, he takes the letter very seriously. It takes him several months, and he rereads it and rewrites it. And the context of the letter is he tells of the communality between Hindu and Christian faith, and at least the faith that he has in this core, simplified, but in his idea, honest Christianity. And he also criticizes the values of the West, of materialism, violence, and an over-reliance on technology. And he urges Indians not to follow the path of the West. But I'll read you a short extract from that letter, where he says, "You say that the English have enslaved your people and hold them in subjection because the latter have not resisted resolution enough and have not met force by force. But the case is just the opposite. If the English have enslaved the people of India, it is just because the latter recognized and still recognizes force as a fundamental principle of social order. In accordance with that principle, they submitted to the little Rajas, struggle on their behalf against one another, fought the Europeans and the English. You are not trying to fight with them again. A commercial company enslaved a nation comprising 200 million people. Tell this to a man who is free from superstition, and he will fail to grasp that these words mean. What does it mean that 30,000 men, not athletes, but other weak and ordinary people, have subdued 200 million vigorous, clever, capable, and freedom-loving people? Do not the figures make it clear that it is not the English who have enslaved the Indians, but the Indians who have enslaved themselves?"
You say it takes him several months to write it. In fact, it takes him 7 months, 29 drafts, and over 400 pages before he is able to put this letter together. That is an extraordinary amount of effort that Tolstoy has put into it. And so how exactly does Gandhi respond to this?
Well, Manasi has put us straight into the questions and given very little time for what may be called a buffer. But I want to say here, just by way of a contextual introduction, before answering Manasi's very specific question, that at the time of this exchange, Tolstoy was 80 years old, and Gandhi was 40. And so you might have, the audience here might have expected the Tolstoy descendant to be a venerable old gentleman and the Gandhi descendant to be somewhat younger. But in actual fact, this Gandhi descendant had to lean on this Tolstoy descendant's hand to climb these steps and come onto the stage. So the fact is that in London, the original Gandhi was leaning on Tolstoy's hand very strongly and firmly and got Tolstoy's support to face the problems of the day, which were not just about the Indians in South Africa, but now to come to Manasi's question. It was about what really may be called the human condition. And I want to read from Gandhi's first letter to Tolstoy, written immediately after he had read this extraordinary document called The Letter to a Hindu. But before I do that, I also want to read a couple of lines which Tolstoy extracts from the Tirukural. I do not know how that Tamil classic got to Yasnaya Polyana in Russia and to Tolstoy's hand, but the Tamil Tirukural reached Tolstoy, and the Tirukural says, according to Tolstoy's excerpt, the aim of the sinless one consists in acting without causing sorrow to others. The aim of the sinless one lies in not doing evil to those who have done evil unto him. If in the morning a man wishes to do evil to another, in the evening the evil will return to him, says the Tirukural, quoted by Tolstoy and read by Gandhi and revisited by us in the city of Jaipur in 2025. Reading the letter to the Hindu in London in a typed form, translated from the Russian original, except from which Daniil has just read so feelingfully, Gandhi says, October 1, 1909, a day before his birthday, his 40th birthday, Count Tolstoy, I take the liberty of inviting your attention. Then he goes on to South Africa. And he says, British Indians, unable to stand the heat of the struggle, have withdrawn from the struggle, and 2,500 of them have, for conscience's sake, allowed themselves to be imprisoned. And as I read this, I was watching our translator to my left on how she says conscience. And conscience, she pointed to her mind. So the conscience is not just about the heart, but about the brain, about the mind, about the intellect, and about the soul. That is what Tolstoy was about. And that is what Gandhi was inspired by in Tolstoy. In the presence of Daniil Tolstoy today, we have the continuity of the tradition of Russia's intelligent heart and human mind at work in a time when violence is abroad.
Now the exchange that follows this is not very long. It is a few letters go back and forth between these two individuals, but every letter is remarkable. So I'm going to take it forward to Tolstoy's final letter to Gandhi before he unfortunately passes away. And Daniil, could you read us a little excerpt from that?
Yes, first I'd like to say that it's, perhaps repeat that it's really an extraordinary historical event that Tolstoy and Gandhi came to correspond. Even though his influence was quite great at the time, his correspondence was limited. For example, he had no contact with one of his more famous contemporary, Dostoevsky. And when he receives the first letter from Gandhi, he's very encouraged by the letter, and he immediately writes a note in his diaries that he's been communicating with a kindred spirit, as he says. And so there's also something quite, I think there's also something quite touching in those letters. You can see that Gandhi is this young, vital and man who is just in front of his life, whereas Tolstoy is just in the end. He's 1 year later he would die, and the letters are very personal, and you can sense that he wants to say more, but it doesn't really have the force. But he does in his last letter to Gandhi encourage him in the struggle for India's independence, and of course doing it by non-violence, agape, unconditional love. I could read you a few extracts from that last letter. Tolstoy points out the hypocrisy inherent in society that profess love with simultaneously embracing violence through the institutions. He sees the contradiction of the root of countless social ills. In a sense, Tolstoy was an anarchist because he didn't. I mean, he believed in that you couldn't really be a Christian and believe in and also participate in institutions that professed violence or had an inherent violent quality. He illustrates this point in the last letter he writes to Gandhi, that there's this bishop in a school, and the children are there. There's one and they ask questions on the 10 Commandments, and especially the 6th commandment, where the first young girl that the bishop asks if are there any situations where you can't kill, or where it is allowed to kill. And the young girl, having been taught about all the sort of sophistries and complexities of politics, replies, well, theoretically no, but of course there are exceptions. When you have a criminal, when there's war, you're allowed to kill. And so the bishop then goes on to ask another poor girl, and the poor girl, blushing, answers, no, there is no occasion. There's never an occasion where you can kill somebody else. And the bishop tries to convince her, uses all his sophistries, all his political skill, all his historical knowledge. And in the end, the girl actually wins the discussion. And according to Tolstoy, this was a true conversation that had taken place that he heard of.
Now, in a speech made many years later, Gandhi says that until he reads Tolstoy, he was a mere votary of non-violence, and he became a true believer after reading In the Kingdom of God by Tolstoy. So, Gopal, can you tell us about how Tolstoy influences the movement that we now know as Satyagraha?
The introduction of Tolstoy's mind into the movement in South Africa took place at a very crucial stage in the evolution of the struggle in South Africa. But we must not overemphasize any particular influence on the transactions of the time. Gandhi himself was part of a much larger awakening that was taking place in South Africa. And in his very restricted and very specific involvement in the affairs of Indian South Africans, he was influenced by Ruskin, by Thoreau, and by Tolstoy. The uniqueness of Tolstoy's influence on him coming like this. Tolstoy's book, The Kingdom of Heaven is Within You. That's the long name of Tolstoy's book. The Kingdom of Heaven is Within You. And that made Gandhi become even more conscious than he ever was of what he called the inner voice. And I've just noticed what the inner voice is shown as in the translation happening to my left. The inner voice is here. The conscience is here. So Tolstoy gave Gandhi a very strong reinforcement of what he regarded as his inner voice, his conscience, which in his case was no different from Rama. For Gandhi, Rama was inner voice. Inner voice was conscience. And Rama, inner voice and conscience amounted to truth. All these four segments coming together was very largely catalyzed by The Kingdom of Heaven is Within You, Tolstoy's great work. And then he comes to this book, manuscript as Manasi has described it, called Letter to a Hindu. I do not know if Gandhi had read Anna Karenina. I hope he did. But if he did not, it was Gandhi's loss, not Anna Karenina's loss. But in Anna Karenina, as Daniil has told me in a letter, inner voice comes through very strongly, and nowhere other than in the character of Levin, extraordinary inner voice. And there lies Tolstoy's great influence on Gandhi. The voice of truth coming as an inner voice saying, do not do evil unto evil, but good unto evil. That is the only way you can redeem India from the British. And now, in the larger context, redeem humanity from the vice-like grip of hatred and violence.
It is clear that Gandhi had heard of Tolstoy and had read Tolstoy before the correspondence, but Tolstoy had not necessarily heard of this relatively unknown, quite successful Indian lawyer in Johannesburg. What makes him respond to this letter that he receives?
Well, I mean, as I said earlier, I think for him, as he had become aware of the situation in India and not wanting what happened in Russia to repeat there, it became a very important cause to him. And I think on a personal level, at least as their correspondence continued, I think in some ways, I think Tolstoy hoped that he would be that Gandhi, because Tolstoy himself was rather complex being. There's a book written by Saya Berlin called The Hedgehog and the Fox, where he says, well, a hedgehog is a creature who knows one great thing, whereas a fox is one who knows many small things. And Tolstoy really tried to become a hedgehog, but was in his nature a fox. So he was very good at and had a very analytical mind. He was very good at seeing faults and deconstructing things, but not as good as at following them himself. Yeah.
So, bringing this conversation forward to the time in which we are now, do you both think that love-based resistance is still the solution in the modern era?
Shall I take that answer? But I'll just say this. The word love is used very rarely and invariably, very self-consciously, by an age which believes in the intellect and reason as the most important assets of the human personality. But just the other day, when Neeraj Chopra flung the javelin and the point reached its target, and all of us hailed the great achievement, Neeraj's mother, in a comment to the media, said something which Gandhi and Tolstoy would have embraced. She said that Nadeem, the Pakistani javelin thrower, also is a great sportsman, and he is like my own son. I think that was love. And more recently, when Gukesh won the world championship in chess, I who know nothing about chess, just remember one thing which Gukesh said. He said to the media, Ding, his Chinese counterpart, said, Ding is the real hero of the game. That is love at the highest possible, Tolstoyan and Gandhian said.
I mean, I agree. I think there's no option if we don't believe in agape, the unconditional love, or at least understanding the other. It's just a matter of force and who has the greatest volume and the greatest weapon. And Tolstoy also would, I think, argue that it's a problem at his time, perhaps even more than that. We rely on science and technology to solve all of our problems, and not perhaps thinking so much of inner transformation and spirituality. And I mean, if we have problems with the environment, it requires more science. If we create huge and dangerous weapons of mass destruction, the solution is even greater weapons of mass destruction. So it's in a sense a vicious circle that we can stop by simple notions like agape, unconditional love.
The other aspect of their influence, or at least Tolstoy's influence on Gandhi, that cannot be ignored is, of course, the great communal experiment at Tolstoy Farm. So I wonder, Gopal, if you can tell us a little bit about Tolstoy Farm.
As I do that, I'd also like to say that we in India have a very generous heart when it comes to iconic leaders. And for us, Gandhi represented the entire struggle in South Africa. But that is not how Gandhi looked at it. After he had finished with his work in South Africa to a certain degree, and when he was returning to India via London, in a conference in London, referring to his wife and himself, who both were there, said, we are being fated and treated to this celebration of the success of our struggle in South Africa. But the real heroes of the struggle in South Africa were the poor workers on the sugar fields and mines, coal mines of South Africa, the laborers from Tamil Nadu and Andhra. It is they who are the heroes of the struggle. They are the salt of the earth on which the future of India will be built. So Gandhi was saying that the success of the struggle in South Africa is not his, but it is that of those who gave what can be called critical mass to the struggle. It is for those struggling Satyagrahis and their families that he set up a farm outside Johannesburg, in which the wives, the mothers, the sisters and children of the Satyagrahis who were in jail, whom he refers to in his letter to Tolstoy, for them to be sheltered while the men were in jail. And for this, along with Hermann Kallenbach, his great associate of German extraction, he had found this 1,100-acre plot near Johannesburg, where he set up a farm where the families could live self-reliantly. And at Kallenbach's instance, he named it the Tolstoy Farm. Tolstoy was gone by then. Tolstoy had died in 1910 at the age of 81, 82. But Tolstoy was so alive and so vibrant in Gandhi's life that this farm, which can be called the magnetic field of the South African Satyagraha campaign, along with the Phoenix Farm in Durban, he named after Count Leo Tolstoy. That was the degree of Tolstoy's influence on South Africa. Anything named by Gandhi after any human being has to recognize the fact that the first Namakaranam by Gandhi of any institution or object was in the name of Count Leo Tolstoy of Russia.
Thank you. You have all been such a generous audience that I do want to take this to audience questions and leave a lot of time for that. But before we conclude, I also want to tell you about a really remarkable chain of events that has continued this historical dialogue to our present day. So I am really, really delighted to share with all of you that Penguin Random House India will soon be publishing an updated edition of the correspondence between Gandhi and Tolstoy with introductions by their descendants. And best of all, we will also be including a contemporary correspondence of letters between my esteemed co-panelists, which has already begun. As a little bit of a fly on the wall, I can tell you the correspondence is absolutely remarkable. It's been wonderful to be privy to this. And we will be taking this conversation forward in a way that mirrors the original exchange. The idea for this, behind this for us is that conversations don't end, they evolve, and they in fact evolve across generations. So I'm delighted. You are amongst the first people in the world to hear about this book. So I am so delighted to share that we will be publishing this book soon. Thank you. So let's take this conversation forward with audience questions.
Can I have
Please?
a first audience question? If possible, just very quickly on the relationship between Gandhi and Tolstoy. And I would say that perhaps the greatest achievement of Tolstoy was the influence he may have had on Gandhi, perhaps even greater than Anna Karenina or War and Peace. But how big would you say? I mean, would Gandhi have approached things differently had he not read the works and had this correspondence not happened?
It is very hard to say what he might have done or not done because he was an extremely unpredictable man. He also had an extremely predictable sense of humor, which was invariably directed at himself. A rare thing now, because today humor is directed at somebody else, laughter is at somebody else's expense. That was now how it was in those times. I just want to, in a way, answer Daniel's question by saying that in his 3 letters to Tolstoy, there were only 3. And my letters to Daniel will also, I can assure you, be very brief and not more than 3, and will be those from a junior to a senior, despite our glaring difference in age. Gandhi ends his first letter to Tolstoy saying, "With respect, I remain your obedient servant, M.K. Gandhi." In his second letter, he says, "I remain your obedient servant, M.K. Gandhi." In his third letter, he says, "I remain your faithful servant, M.K. Gandhi." And Tolstoy's letter to Gandhi, second and not the last letter, ends with, "Your friend and brother, Leo Tolstoy." But magically, his last letter to Gandhi, written shortly before his end, "With my perfect esteem, Leo Tolstoy." Look at the esteem and the respect between the two. So I will answer this question by saying, were it not for Tolstoy's influence on Gandhi at that particular stage, the Satyagraha struggle in South Africa would have happened. It would have been led by him with the same ardor and the same passion. But Tolstoy gave him, along with Thoreau and Ruskin, and not to forget the Sermon on the Mount, but going beyond all that, a little chain he wore, which was given to him by his mother, a very Hindu chain called the Kanthi, which was for him a source of his deep-rooted faith in the truth of Rama. All these together, with Tolstoy almost acting like the electricity in a generation of turbine, gave him the propulsion to go ahead. And in his second imprisonment, he left the prison in South Africa, giving a copy of Tolstoy's The Kingdom of Heaven is Within You to his jail warden. Gandhi giving Tolstoy's book to his jail warden showed Tolstoy's influence. Fight without any slackening. Serve your cause with intrepid zeal, but without a shred of hatred in you. And as the Kural had said, not evil for evil, but good for good. Gandhi giving that book to his jailer was Tolstoy embodying himself at the heart of Satyagraha.
Okay, let's see a show of hands. Can we take it to the young lady on the second row, please? There.
Manasi, you may have to repeat the question for me.
Sir, after having talked about a lot of similarities between the two, were there any differences between the two?
Tolstoy and Gandhi were extremely frank individuals. And just as I said, Gandhi was a deeply rooted Hindu, Tolstoy was a deeply rooted Christian. And in this letter to the Hindu, Tolstoy makes a point about the Hindu faith in reincarnation. And Tolstoy does not accept the theory of reincarnation. And Gandhi, with great respect to Tolstoy, says to him, in our translation of your work, please permit us to delete your reference to reincarnation, because the majority of your readers are going to be Hindus and they will not understand what you are saying about reincarnation, in which we Hindus have an unshakable belief. And Tolstoy said, I see your point. I still do not believe in reincarnation, but seeing your point, you may delete that portion. The glue of a friendship is frankness. To be able to say, I agree with you here, I disagree with you here. Take my agreement, take my disagreement. Let us agree to disagree. I am your obedient servant.
Let's take it to the young lady in the second row again on this side. And please do keep it brief.
Namaste, my name is Jolie and I have a question for you. Since Tolstoy and Gandhiji both believed in truth and non-violence, but what is a lesser known aspect of their life that has influenced you a lot?
The lesson of their lives.
A lesser known aspect of their life.
Lesser known aspect of their lives. A lesser known aspect of their lives. Gandhi had 4 sons. Tolstoy had 14 children. Daniel is the son of a son of a son of Leo Tolstoy. Lesser known aspect of it is that Gandhi and Tolstoy were extraordinary human beings, but they were first and foremost extraordinary householders. They loved their family as they loved humanity, and they loved humanity as they loved their families. Let me make this very clear. In one of the letters to Tolstoy, Gandhi speaks with great pride of his son Harilal, who he says is in jail just now. Tolstoy's love of his family is for Daniel to describe in greater detail. The lesser known aspect of their lives is MKG and CLT, Count Leo Tolstoy, were above everything else. Husbands who could be critiqued by their very sharp wives, fathers of children with problems of their own. Luckily, neither of them got to see too much of their grandchildren.
I'll just add a quick thing regarding Tolstoy's wife and also his early the importance for him to be honest. And so when Tolstoy and Sfindra, before they got married, he told her that he wanted her to read his diaries before they married, and so she accepted this. But unfortunately for poor Sophia, she never really quite recovered. Although of course they did love each other very much.
Manasi, is there time for us to ask each other a quick question?
I've been told we're out of time. I'm sure that my co-panelists would be delighted to answer your questions off the stage. But truly, thank you for being such a generous and wonderful audience. And thank you so much for spending an hour talking to us about this incredible correspondence.